and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. I have a really heartful conversation on deck for you today, and I'm super excited to bring it to you. I met today's guest a while ago, a couple months ago, when she reached out to me to sort of make connections in the coaching world, and I just loved sort of her energy and what she had to say about the work that she does, that I invited her to be on the podcast. So I'm so thrilled that we are making that happen. So today's guest is a lovely woman by the name of Mary Willcox Smith. Mary is a speaker, a multi-published author, and a parent coach with 25 years, now 26 years, of raising 4 daughters and coaching fellow parents. She is the founder of the Micro-Step Method, a 3-step framework that helps parents break free from stress and frustration and nurture emotionally healthy, connected kids. Mary is a certified master life coach and a positive discipline expert, and she has an MBA. Beyond her expertise, Mary is authentic, relatable, and has a great sense of humor. And I think you'll see that, really come sort of shining through in our time together today. Mary and I are going to dig into some of the things that get in our way as parents, some of what she calls parent traps, some things about her micro-step method, and the benefits and the beauty of making repairs with our kids. I think you'll get a lot out of today's conversation. I know I loved being a part of it. So without further ado, Mary Willcox Smith. Mary, it is so great to be finally making this happen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Christy. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So I want to start, you and I met a little while back and connected as fellow coaches in the parenting space. But I want to start with kind of what your journey is. Like, where are you from? What's your family? And how did you find yourself landed here in the space of supporting parents?
Yeah, good question. So I come from a big family. I had plenty of, even though I grew up with this sort of amazing family, the big white house on the hill and a couple dogs and some horses and siblings, there was also a lot of stuff going on. So I had some real big T trauma in my childhood. But I used what they call a maladaptive, as you know, coping mechanism, and was a perfectionist. I was the second to youngest of a bunch of kids. And I coped by going out and getting people to like me and succeeding. So I kind of went through life, one win after another, and went to a good school, just did well. I was a classic good student. And then I went abroad. I started a company in Switzerland, which is very fun. I did a skiing holiday in Switzerland and did my MBA. And when I met my husband and we decided to have kids, I kind of thought, I got this. I've left all that dysfunction behind. Look at me. Parenting is going to be just the same. And I'm not going to have any problems. There's no chocolate on my kid charts, and that wasn't the case. It was all great. And I had 4 girls within 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Fast. My second one had pretty serious medical conditions. She had born with lung issues, but had a feeding tube. We really ultimately didn't get out till she was even 11, but she was fed almost primarily through it for a solid 6 years, a lot of hospitalizations. So a lot going on.
Yeah.
But they were girls and they were good kids, and, they did well at school. A lot of it was easy. And then I could use my control focus, on the child that had all the extra needs. And then they hit their tweens, and suddenly it wasn't as easy. And I think it's because, I guess it happens initially when they're 3 or so, when they start talking back and rolling their eyes. And then you hit those tweens and you get a second kind of surge that, for me, that I wasn't ready for. And I sort of opened that parenting toolbox that we talk about, and it was empty. Mm-hmm. And up until then, I'd kind of ridden the wave. And if they do well, they'll be happy. That's how I'll build their self-esteem. And they were doing well. So it all looked great from the outside. But then I started to see some of my anxiety in them. And it was at that point that I sort of, because we were going through hard times, I was going through hard times. So then I did a lot more therapy, learned a lot about meditation, and then I dove into the neuroscience of all of it
Uh-huh.
and child development and learned a tremendous amount, slowly began to put it into place. But I would say I started late, right? I think it's
Yeah.
harder as you get to it later. And I'm
Yeah.
really blessed with good kids. I'm very lucky. But yeah, they all have my angst and some of my anxiety and that, perfectionism. And I just remember thinking I'd used therapists. I used therapists for me. One child saw a therapist all the time. I randomly went to other therapists, sort of thinking someone else could fix the problem.
Uh-huh.
And what I really wish was that someone had really grabbed me by my shoulders and said, Mary, you feel like you're giving 150%. And you're right, they need you, but that they really need is for you to show up a little bit differently some of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so just to finish it, it would be to say, sort of around that time, I thought, I am going to go into this. I had no idea parent coaches even existed, probably, but I am going to go into this and help people not do it the hard way, like I did. And that's sort of the short story, the long story of how I got here.
Yeah. I mean, what a journey. And I have to say that act of self-reflection where there was the aha, oh, I need to show up differently. The problem might be with me and not with them,
Yes.
is a really hard moment for us all as parents, for any of us who have had that moment
Yeah.
or are willing to do that. It's not an easy thing.
No, and it's really a bummer. 'Cause, sorry, you so wanted to be just their fault.
Yes.
It's like, oh, I have to do some work. I have to try to do things differently. I'm not perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when perfectionism was your coping mechanism for the
Yes.
big T trauma in your childhood, and suddenly that's not working, it
Right.
can really leave a person a little raw.
Yeah.
Yeah. How old are your four girls now?
They're now between 21 and and 26 yesterday, 2 days ago, 21 and 26.
Okay. So, I mean, we all know, or maybe we don't all know, but I know parenting never really ends. So you are still parenting. I know. Right. It's the secret we didn't need to share. But you've kind of made it to the other side of the real thick of it. And you did all this research and learning and now you support parents. Tell me a little bit about how you do that.
I guess I come to it very much. Of course, I've studied coaching and I've studied positive parenting and I've studied so much neuroscience. I love the brain science behind it all because it makes it really so clear and obvious, which I
Mhm.
love. So I try to simplify that for parents. I do that with my speaking. I try to do that in my book. Like, how can we simplify this brain science? Because a lot of very bright people I know just haven't had the time or energy or whatever to understand it. So I bring that to it. And what I really try to do is because I was so frenetic, it's the way I am. So many of us, we live in a world of multitasking, but that's one of the ways I kept myself sane as well as a child. I was constantly busy, and I really haven't gotten rid of that, even though I'm supposed to. I do my meditation. So I bring to it sort of, I assume that a lot of my clients have that same, just trying to get it right, just trying to get through the day, got so much going on. And so I really try to break it down for them. And we really approach it. And you may do the same, but very much one step at a time. I never let them walk away feeling like there's an overhaul
Yeah.
because I think that was one of my downfalls. First of all, I wanted an overhaul. And secondly, I wanted it tomorrow.
Yes. Yes.
And you can't. Now, some parents who come to me, I think, who don't have some of these, what I call parent traps, which I'll talk about quickly in a second, but who don't have as much of that, maybe some of that trauma or some of those old stories that are just haunting them a little bit more than others, they're able to implement quite quickly and see change quite quickly. So,
Yeah.
50% of the parents are like that. 50% also have probably more of that angst that I have, where we're telling ourselves stories. And what I say is those old stories drive what I then call the parent trap, which might be my kid needs to excel. I have to be my kid's best friend. My
Yep.
child needs to respect me. And so I spend a lot of time really trying to help people understand there's an activating event that's just what's happening in front of you. And if you can
Right.
get yourself to just notice it, we can get a little bit into our thinking brain. And then to really see, just have the awareness to stop there so that then we can work on looking at what our behavior is because of that thought.
Yeah.
And so then I sort of see it as 3 steps. And so I really remind people that parenting at that time is just not, it's not parenting. So you really shouldn't try to do too much.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to something that you said because it really kind of struck me or resonated with me, which is that idea that so many parents, and I get this 100%, but I've had clients say this to me, right? I just want you to tell me what to do today. Like
No.
fix it now. Just make it like fix it now. And I'll say, there's a method to the madness. Like we have to slow down and back up the truck a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I love this idea or this sort of label that you've given to these idea of parent traps. And you mentioned what a couple of those might be, right? Like my child needs to be perfect or my child needs to respect me. I'd love to hear you dive into those a little bit more because I think some of those might be internal, individual messages, and some of them are really cultural, right?
Well, I would say nowadays, culture is making it real. You're right. Our culture today, and I mean, I have kids who, played D1 sports. I've been around. I've seen it. I saw myself doing it, you know what I mean? But at least I was aware. And I did let my kids do it on their own. But we're all in that world now where there's such a drive that we think kids are going to develop their self-esteem and their confidence when they make the A team or they get in the honors program or we get them in whatever we call GT now so that it's a nice word for gifted and talented.
Mhm.
And that is cultural. So that one of my kids have to excel. You must too, right? We spend time talking to our parents about what that really means. And sometimes stripping back to their values, I find is one way to help them climb out of it.
Yeah.
Because you're right. That one, for me, my kids must excel sort of to be happy. That's definitely inside me, right? That's
Yes.
how I lived. But there are a lot of people who really truly believe because they are being told by coaches and teachers and schools, they got to find their passion by the time they're 8.
Right. Well, and I feel like we're then seeing that like exacerbated in the way college applications and college and all that's a whole separate conversation we could get into, but
Yes.
but there's certainly some elements that then continue on that then make parents feel even more pressure. And let's be really honest about it. Our egos get mixed up in this, which is an
So
us problem, not a them problem, as you were talking about.
100%. And I think in a way, egos, even though it's probably the hardest, as soon as someone's aware, that's almost an easier one to fix, but it's getting that awareness. But when it's tied, I don't know if you've done any work with schemas, but Jeffrey Young is a big one for these schemas. And he talks about basically stories that we learn very young,
Mhm.
stories that we tell ourselves based. Now, I had big trauma, but these stories can come from a divorce, the birth of a sibling, a grandparent passing away, death of a pet. I mean, it can be anything. And we pile into what I think of as my backpack, and our stories come out of that. And so, what I often will say when we talk about parent traps, because there's what you're saying, cultural and ego, but there's also this piece that sometimes my child needs to excel at anything might come from a belief we have about ourselves that's
Uh,
like, I'm not worthy.
yep.
When I succeed and I'm perfect, then I'll belong, then I'll matter.
Yes.
Or, another great one is, my child needs to respect me. That might come from the schema or story that we tell ourselves, why does no one listen to me? Why does no one ever do what I say? And then what happens is the third grader rolls her eyes and you're like, go to your room. You do not treat me like that. And it's because that's the trigger, right? But I think of it as a parent trap because I think of ourselves literally as trapped in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of what you were just describing really reverberates for me with the work of Brene Brown, with the idea of the stories that we tell ourselves and the perfectionism as a cover up for vulnerability, because vulnerability is really scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know there's a number of different people doing that similar work from a different angle and a different language.
All over. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it all kind of leads us back to that same space, which is recognizing our role in what's going on with our kids.
And then the trick is, that's why the parent trap idea, because if we can name them, it makes it a little bit easier to be aware of them. And then you have to move out of that, system 1 brain into the system 2 brain, right? Because as soon as you're in yours, I sort of call it, whose story is it? If we're in our story, it's impossible to be in theirs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the hard part.
100%. 100%. You have sort of developed some specific tools to support parents as they work through this, these parent traps, and then kind of repairing, I guess, or fixing.
Oh, the whole second stage is really that safety piece. It's all that you do all the time too. Validation, safety, building trust. When you're in your good brain and your child's not.
Yes. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that and what you call the micro steps method.
So the micro steps basically came about because, as I might have mentioned, I'm frenetic. And when I started realizing that the brain science was behind all of this, it just opened my eyes so much because it, I don't know. There's probably, sometimes I think everyone must have heard it at this point, but that's not the case. There's a lot of people out there, when you talk about having to sort of understand your child and get them, it feels woo.
Yep.
And I think I sort of thought that too. And, as I said to my husband the other day, I said, the problem is I raised my kids the way I sort of was raised, what I thought I needed. And he was like, you mean you just need them to survive? And I was like, okay, it's a little harsh.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I did when I sort of first started getting into parent coaching was I started these emails that I called the Microstep Minute. And I would take an event that happens with all of us, where your kid's saying something that you really don't agree with, and therefore you don't want to agree with them. And I would sort of lay out the event, and then I would sort of just discuss the brain science behind it really simply. So it made me kind of consolidate that brain science and make it easy to understand. And people just liked them because it just shrunk it all down to, like, in that moment, why does it matter that I accept what they're saying? And then I would explain accepting is not agreeing. This is a difference between accepting and agreeing. This is what it does to their brain, and this is why it works. And this is why you're building resilience and building a better connection. So each one of them was sort of had a basis, a foundation of resilience and connection. And I explained it. So I just ended up kind of liking that. And so when I'm working with parents, very often I'll be like, okay, this week we're working on accepting is not agreeing. I want you to accept what your child says. Yeah, gym class can stink. I imagine you can't, I can understand like you didn't like the teacher today. Instead of, you got another 18 years of it, you better like it. Whatever. I pick one thing and I'll say, just go away and work on this and let's see what happens. And sometimes we do more, sometimes we do less, but it gives me something simple for them to go and work on.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of building my library of them as I go along. I put 40 of them into my book. And again, it just gave me a way of simplifying what was happening down to a moment, because it's the only way I can focus.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that idea because as you said, most of us as parents are pretty frenetic. We got a lot of things going on, and sort of bringing it down to one or two things that we can focus on is really helpful. And specifically, I love the idea that you mentioned that acceptance is not agreement, which I'm thinking about so many different contexts in which that simple idea or seemingly simple idea could really shift the dynamic between people. And I'm not just talking about parents and children,
No, you're right.
like
You're right.
between adults who are, right,
Yes.
that acceptance is not the same as agreement. Yeah, really kind of a revolutionary idea. And I have to imagine, because as you describe it, that way, like with that specific language, it almost creates a freedom, right? In the way that we can interact with our kids.
I like that. I like that. And I've never ever said it that way, but I think, yes, exactly. And also, that sort of for me, when I was doing these moments, just seeing that there's a reason behind it that actually makes sense. It's research backed and they see it on the brain scans, gives you that freedom.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I love positioning it as freedom. And can I add something about the moments that,
Please do. Yes.
because ultimately I sort of talk about this method, but what I sort of got into was, we really think, what are our kids going to remember when they grow up? And we think, okay, the championships, the trip to Disney, the elephant pinata at my best ever ninth birthday. Those moments are really important and they matter for us and for them. But research shows that these little moments and connecting moments, these emotionally significant moments, of which there are millions to take advantage of, and we don't need to take advantage of all of them,
Yeah.
but there are so many opportunities that they don't just have an importance in that moment, but they actually compound.
Mhm.
And I have a graph, but I show that they compound and the likelihood of your child developing, emotionally in an emotionally healthy way to thrive in what's becoming more and more difficult world to thrive in,
Yeah.
you actually compound and you set them on a much steeper trajectory if we can just get some of those moments right.
Yeah.
And that's for all of the overwhelmed working moms and parents to having, everyone out there who's just, even if we're not working, it's just crazy to say, you know what? Let's just focus on 10 moments this week. Try to get it right twice. And then
Yes.
you start building your brain
100%.
to do it
Well, and that
differently.
brings us back to that idea of freedom, right? That for me, like as you're talking, I'm like, that comes back to the idea of freedom, which is we can focus on some of these little everyday things, which might feel a lot less pressury than
Yes.
creating big moments all the time, right? And you're right, those can be great and those can be memorable and they're important. But if we can focus on, yeah, what are we going to do in the tiny moments twice or five times this week? Like
And
there's
some of
there's
those
freedom in that.
moments, yes. And some of those moments are fun moments. Some of those, okay, I'm going to sit down and turn off my phone for 3 minutes and just ignore it for 3 minutes and focus on my kid. And some of them are saying no. Some of them are biting our tongue when they're being rude and remembering this is not where they learn. I call that one the not now moment. This
Mhm.
is not where they learn. I'm going to bite my tongue and we're going to deal with this later.
Yeah.
And so they're all, they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to feel like unicorns and daisies, is what I mean.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you say that because a dear friend of mine just left me a message that she's expecting her first child.
Oh,
And I was leaving her a message back and saying, I'm so thrilled for you. And I give you permission for it not to all be puppies and rainbows, right? Because
it's
it
really
isn't
kind.
unicorns and daisies and puppies and rainbows and all, right? It's hard. It's really hard. I know one of the things that you talk about and work with parents on is the idea of turning ruptures into growth, right? These sort of opportunities for repair. Share with us a little more about that, because I think there's such gold in this.
There is a lot of cold in that. And, I think traditionally parenting on the back end as a sort of term means, punishing right after an event, right?
Mhm.
I call parenting on the back end. I will say to people, look, you're not ready yet to deal with this situation when it's coming at you because it's too much. You're overwhelmed, you're triggered. So, what we're going to do is parent later. So, I kind of
Yes.
call it parenting on the back end in a different way, but not that I coined the term or anything, but I think of it as let yourself go when it's happening. And we're
Mhm.
going to do the parenting later. And just to quickly tie this, I talked about our stories. I talked about this backpack we have full of all of our childhood baggage that are the stories that you talk about or the schemas I talk about. And those stories happen when things happen to a child that they're too innocent to process. They don't make sense. Like the guinea pig dies or the parents divorce or whatever. They get left in the car by mistake or there's a big fight, whatever. And we're not going to always get it right. We're going to blow up. That makes sense. We're only human. Of course, all these things, these ruptures are going to happen. I think of them as ruptures. They're going to happen all the time.
Yeah.
So I think of connection as being like a chain link. And a rupture is when something has happened to break that connection. And when that connection is broken is often when they have a hard time processing. So that's what gets stuffed away in the backpack. Now, a repair allows us to go back and to reframe what happened because children without it depends on the child, but a lot of children, even up to quite a significant age, without the help of an adult to process a big emotion, will blame themselves or will tell themselves stories like, I make bad things happen. I'm not a good person. I make my parents yell. I make my mother cry.
Yeah.
So that sits in that backpack. But a day, an hour, a day, a week, a month later, you can go back and say, look, I was thinking about what happened last week. I really blew up because you weren't brushing your teeth. And a repair isn't. Had you just brushed your teeth, it would have been a lot easier and I wouldn't have had to get so mad. Because what that's doing, and I think we all know this, but what that's doing is saying, my emotion is happening because of you.
Yep. Yep.
And then people will say, oh no, but my child understands because he came back and apologized. They come back and apologize because they're disconnected. And
Yeah.
they need that hardwired connection so badly. So they're not apologizing because they get it and they understand that their misbehavior was hurtful. And different kids are different. Some kids are no problem and some kids take it really personally. I mean, we do a temperament thing, but most kids are going to sort of attribute some of it to themselves because they want to be good. So I'll keep getting back to my repair. So when we're doing that repair and we don't blame them for our emotions because really, as I sometimes say, there's only one adult in the room. And unfortunately, as an adult, you're also a parent. And really, the parent is the change agent.
Yeah.
So when you recognize instead, I had a really hard day, I was starving, I just wanted to go read my book, which I know doesn't seem very nice, but that's what I felt like. And I yelled at you. And I think that must have really hurt or maybe hurt your feelings. And maybe you feel like I don't think you can do anything right. But really, it's about my emotions. And I know you were trying to do it and you were just having fun on your tablet.
Yeah.
So, number one is revisiting what happened, but taking responsibility for our piece in it. And we don't have to grovel for them to say it's okay. We don't have them to say, yeah, you're right. We're just reframing that story. So the story that gets thrown into the backpack is, oh, my behavior maybe wasn't 100%, but I'm okay. Mom loves me and we're still connected. And now not only are you have like a beautiful connecting moment that's almost worth the blow up, which is why I like doing it on the back end, but you're rewriting a story for them that's so
Yeah.
critical to their emotional growth. Have I explained that well?
You have. And, the thing I think is so important to highlight that you said, because we hear people say it all the time, you are making me mad, right? And what you really highlighted there is no, like we are responsible for our own anger. Our children don't make us mad. The dog doesn't make us mad. It's our reaction that's really individual to us. It's funny that I've heard this described several different ways, and I love the way that you're talking about it. I think it's Dr. Shefali Sabari that talks about the idea that the way that we know it's about us and not about them is that you can put two parents side by side. One will get
Yes.
upset by the behavior and the other one won't.
Yes.
Right. And so if it were truly about what the child is doing, then both parents would get upset. Any parent who was there would get upset. The fact that they don't tells us it's more about us.
It's a great way to look at it.
And there's this, as you've described it, there's the stories that kids then put in their backpack when we don't take responsibility for our own emotions and our own responses and reactions, really, because that's what they are, is reactions, not responses.
Right.
Like those stories can build up to a novel. It's almost like a bunch of short stories that builds into a book, right?
Yes.
That's maybe not the narrative that we want for our kids.
And it's not full sentences, right? That's why therapy is all about going back into those and, undoing them. But it's exactly right. And I want to just repeat that it's not groveling for the kid to like you again. In fact, it's okay if they almost say nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I love the idea of sort of ending it with, some problem solving. If, with a younger kid, they might get over it really quickly. And you say, what should we do about the toothbrushing so I don't have to yell or whatever? And maybe you need some help doing that, right? But there's so much opportunity in it. And something that I don't really use with my clients, but I just made me think of it when you were talking about it, is with my kids, I used to say, oh yeah, it's not you. I have this little man that runs around in my head and he makes me really mad. And I remember like my 6-year-old, I was lucky I got a lot of things right, but I got a lot of things wrong. So I'm a mix. But they'd be like, oh, is that man making you mad again? And I'd be, yep, he is in there running around.
Yes.
And I knew that I didn't want them, which they probably did a little bit anyways, but I didn't want them to think, well, especially because I had anxiety and I had some depression. Like I didn't want them to think that was their fault.
Yeah. I love the way of thinking about that. There's this little man in your head, but really thinking about that as the message that we want them to walk away with, right, from these interactions. And I know it's really hard for many parents to apologize and repair with their child, and as a human myself who grew up with a dad who I love, but he's never really been able to say, I'm sorry. Right. That's not a skill set that he has. That's doesn't feel good, right? That can be really hard as a child. And it can continue to do damage to the connection and the relationship into the adult years. And I know I'm not the only one that can relate to that experience, right? Mm-hmm. Where it can take the inability to apologize to our children can create ruptures again and again and again. And I'd be willing to bet that there's no one listening to this right now that's like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, right. Like, let's just let those ruptures go. No biggie.
Yeah.
None of us want that for our kids.
None of us. I mean, I think I got asked a question once on some interview I was doing for something, and they said something about what makes a good parent. Mm. And I said, that's a great question, because let's take two parents. One wakes up, gets the kid up with a big kiss. The kid gets out of bed. They go downstairs. Everything's perfect and lovey. And, they hop off to school and say goodbye. The other one gets her child up. He refuses to get out of bed. She yells at him. They go downstairs, whatever. A pancake gets thrown because she's infuriated. He doesn't have his sneakers and he can't find the second sneaker. And, she pushes him into the door to get him into school. I would argue both parents are doing the best that they absolutely can in that moment.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's a reality. And, I think as Tara Brach says, big meditation person, she calls herself the queen of shame. I'm like, no, I'm the queen of shame. I have a lot of shame. It all starts with self-compassion. which is really hard. But when you can forgive yourself, it becomes also easier to forgive your children.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, parenting is throwing the pancake and pushing the kid into the door. And parenting is listening and accepting and validating and cheering them on at the soccer game. None of those, to me, they're all parenting.
Yes.
And it's just trying to make more of the good moments and repairing when we need to and making little steps every day to try to do better because it's hard.
Yeah. I think that thing that you acknowledged a moment ago is so important. And I bring this to my work as well. The idea that we are all doing the best that we can with the skills that we have in the moment that we are in. And I should say the skills and the energy that we have, because I have a lot of skills as a parent coach. And there are times when I haven't slept well or I haven't eaten or whatever, and my energy isn't matching my skills. And those are often moments that, let's just say, they present opportunities for repair.
Yeah, they're hard. There's science that says it is easier to fall into that brain that's reactive in those moments. That's just a reality. Got to get through them.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Some moments are meant simply to be survived. And with that, we can end.
There is such a raw, honest truth to that in parenting, right? That some moments are just meant to be survived, directly from your mouth. I think it's so, so true. I want to sort of wrap up with a question that is kind of coming to me as we talk, which is, in the work that you do, and I know you primarily work with parents of girls, right?
And more now too. I'm kind of niching down for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Given that you've raised 4 of them on your own, or not on your own,
not on my own,
but you are the parent to 4 daughters. If every parent could have 30 seconds with you and walk away knowing one thing, what would you want them to know?
One would be, I don't mean call me, but get the support you need. Mm-hmm. That is not sales. That is like, I really didn't think I needed any help.
Yeah.
I figured I knew. I had these degrees. I'd done well. People liked me. But parenting is different.
Yeah.
And there are tools that help, and it's really helpful to get support. I don't care if it's 6 people at the library, whatever, a bunch of your favorite mom friends. But support does help. So that's, I guess, one thing that I would want to say. The second is one of my favorite moments. Can I share it?
Absolutely.
So it's what I call lighting up. It comes from Toni Morrison. You may have heard it. But this is what I sort of tell people. Imagine you're in the kitchen and you're, cutting the carrots for lunch. You're stirring the oatmeal. You're wondering where the water bottle went. And your 8-year-old walks in. And you're in a hurry and you got to get out the door. And you're like, you know what? Get back upstairs and change your shirt. It's dirty. And then get down here. We got to have breakfast. And we think that sort of our love is on display because we're caring for them. Mm-hmm. We care that their shirt's dirty. We care they get carrots. We care we get them out on time. But they don't get the intention behind our words. They look at our face and they see this critical face and they think, what's wrong now?
Yeah.
And it's really easy to do that because of our culture and because of everything we're trying to do and because they've got to be professional basketball players by the age of 5. So it's completely normal that we do that. But as Toni Morrison said years ago with Oprah, when your child walks in, your child or anyone else's, does your face light up? Because that's what they're looking for.
Yes.
And if you can just get in the habit when they're little of when they walk in, of just locking eyes, getting down to their level if you have the time and they're little, and just smiling and letting your face say, I am so happy to see you. Yeah. And then I did the math quickly because first, actually, to say it speaks volumes. It's what I always say. Yes. It's a tiny moment that has enormous impact. Mm-hmm. That's where kids get their resilience. That's where they connect. That's where they get safety and trust that help them go out and take risks and become who they're supposed to become. So quick math, I did something I did between 5 and 15. You greet your kid on average twice a day. You have like over 7,000 opportunities to do that. So you don't even have to
light
do
up.
it all the time.
Yeah.
But it's just one little thing that you can add that really does have an impact.
I remember that interview, and I think about it often as well. And it is just, I mean, when we walk into a room, if our partners light up when we walk in, or if they're like, did you pick up the whatever at the store? Right. That doesn't feel great. Yeah. And it's the same for our kids. I love that. Okay. So sending people away with the idea of, yes, get support wherever that, whatever angle, whatever place that comes from. I'm totally with you. And I often say we were never meant to parent alone.
Never.
Right. And then lighting up when our kids walk in the room. Mary, this has been a really lovely conversation. And I know you have so much more wisdom to share, but I just want to thank you for being here and sharing your heart and your story and your tips with listeners so that we can all walk away and maybe hope that someone will light up when we walk into the room today.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Christy. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. As I said, I think it was really heartful and just it came from, I could tell, such an authentic place for Mary. And we really connected over some of the similarities in the work that we do and in our belief, wholehearted belief, that parents deserve and need to be supported. If you're one of those parents that, that Mary sort of described, who's like, I don't need help, I can do this, I can figure it out, but it's feeling hard or lonely or frustrating, or you're just finding yourself wondering, like, am I doing the right thing? You may have heard me mention it before, but I want to mention it again, and that is the Heartful Parent Academy. As you heard me say in the interview, I'm a huge believer that we were never meant to parent alone. And the Academy is designed to be the resource that is easy, accessible, affordable for every parent out there. It is, and I'm not exaggerating here, the only parenting membership out there on the market that covers both brain-safe parenting strategies and body-safe parenting strategies and gives you lots and lots of access to me to get your questions answered. So whether you've got a toddler or a tween or somebody in between, I hope you will consider joining me in the Heartful Parent Academy. It is chock full of goodness and chock full of access, direct access to me to get your questions answered. So the link for that is down below. Also, in the show notes down below, you will find a download that you can get from today's guest, Mary Willcox Smith. It is called Stop the Sass, 3 Steps to Getting Kids to Listen. It's a fantastic resource, chock full of information, tips, and scripts. And you will find the link where you can download that from Mary's website and, get your hands on it and start using it today. You will also find where you can connect with Mary on social media and on her website in general. So I hope that you will do that. And as Mary said, listen, I am a big believer in the work that I do and in the Heartful Parent Academy, but I'm not for everybody, right? And Mary's not for everybody, but Mary is a resource for you. I'm a resource for you. And there are lots of other folks, many of whom we talk to week after week on the podcast. And I wholeheartedly encourage you to reach out and get the support that feels best for you. Like I said, you'll hear me say it again. I've said it several times today, but we were never meant to parent alone. So just don't. All right, on that note, cheers, everybody.